Maya Reed's life is on the brink of transformation. A bright future awaits her after being accepted into her dream university. But when a routine drive through her neighborhood turns into a nightmare, Maya is confronted with the harsh reality of systemic bias. Pulled over and wrongfully detained by Officer Cole Tanner, her life becomes a public spectacle as a video of the arrest goes viral. Thrust into the spotlight, Maya's resolve is tested as she fights for justice, guided by her father, Chief Marcus Reed. But when she uncovers a connection between her father and Cole's troubled past, Maya faces an impossible choice. Expose the truth that could tear her family and community apart, or work to heal the wounds and change a broken system. In a story about forgiveness, redemption, and the power of truth, Through the Eyes of Justice challenges one young woman to rise above and lead the fight for a better tomorrow. Will she have the courage to transform not just her own life, but the world around her? The sun beamed down on the quiet, tree-lined streets as Maya Reed guided her father's sleek black car through the neighborhood. Her curls bounced with every turn, and her eyes sparkled as she caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. The acceptance letter she'd received that morning was still fresh in her mind, a ticket to her dream university. It felt like all her hard work had finally paid off. Nothing can ruin this day, she whispered to herself, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the steering wheel as her favorite song played on the radio. She glanced out the window at the pristine lawns and grand houses, imagining her future and the endless possibilities ahead. Soon, one of these will be mine, she mused. I'll make Dad proud. Her father, Chief Marcus Reed, had insisted she take his car to celebrate. His words echoed in her mind. You've earned this, kid. Go enjoy yourself. It wasn't just a car ride. It was a reminder of how far she'd come. As she cruised through the neighborhood, she allowed herself to feel that surge of pride. She was on top of the world, and for a moment, it seemed nothing could bring her down. A few blocks away, Officer Cole Tanner sat in his patrol car, his eyes scanning the streets. It was supposed to be a routine patrol shift, but his mood had already soured after an argument with his partner earlier that morning. The sight of the black luxury car caught his attention. It wasn't the car itself that bothered him but the driver, a young black woman. His eyes narrowed as he muttered to himself, "No way a kid like that can afford a car like this." The distrust that had built up over years of cynicism settled into his gut. His father's voice echoed in his mind. Always follow your instincts, Cole. You can't trust everyone. Without a second thought, he flipped on the lights. The flash of red and blue reflected in his windshield as he pulled out behind her. Maya's heart jumped as she saw the flashing lights in her rearview mirror. Confused, she pulled over to the side of the road, her hands trembling slightly as she turned off the engine. What did I do wrong? She whispered, glancing at her surroundings. Officer Tanner approached the driver's side window, his hand resting on his belt. License and registration, he barked, his tone cold and impersonal. Maya's brow furrowed, but she kept her voice steady. Of course, officer. May I ask what I did wrong? He didn't answer. Instead, his eyes remained fixed on her, suspicion etched in every line of his face. Just hand over the documents, miss. With a small nod, Maya reached for her wallet and the glove compartment. She handed over the items, her hands shaking slightly. Tanner snatched them from her grasp, his eyes flicking to the registration. This car is registered to a Marcus Reed, he said, his tone accusatory. Care to explain that? Maya took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Yes, sir. Marcus Reed is my father. He's the police chief. He lent me the car today. Tanner scoffed, his disbelief evident. Right, and I'm the mayor. Step out of the vehicle. Her heart began to race, but she forced herself to remain composed. Officer, if you could just call my father. I said, step out of the vehicle, he repeated, his voice rising. Slowly, Maya unbuckled her seatbelt and opened the door. She stepped out, her legs feeling weak beneath her. There's been a misunderstanding, sir. I haven't done anything wrong. Tanner's face remained cold as he gestured for her to turn around and place her hands on the car. Turn around. Hands on the vehicle. Tears stung Maya's eyes, but she blinked them back, determined to keep her composure. She felt the cold metal of the car against her palms, her breath quickening as Tanner grabbed her wrists and snapped the handcuffs on. "Officer, please," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "Just call my father. He can explain everything." Tanner ignored her, his face set in stone as he called for backup over his radio. "Dispatch, I've got a possible stolen vehicle situation. Need assistance." A crowd began to gather as people slowed their cars to gawk at the scene. Maya felt their eyes on her, the judgment in their stares, and her humiliation deepened. She glanced around, hoping someone would intervene, but all she saw were phones recording her every move. "This is so wrong," she whispered, feeling the tightness of the cuffs digging into her wrists. "I didn't do anything wrong." Tanner didn't look up. "You have the right to remain silent," he began mechanically. But Maya barely heard him over the pounding of her heart. Marcus's phone buzzed on his desk, and he frowned when he saw Maya's name on the screen. "Dad, Her voice trembled, barely audible over the chaos in the background. "I need your help. They're arresting me. They think I stole your car." His heart dropped, and his instincts kicked in. "Where are you?" he demanded, already grabbing his keys and heading for the door. Minutes later, he arrived at the scene, his face a mask of fury and concern. He spotted Maya, handcuffed and surrounded by a small crowd, and his blood boiled. "Officer," he called out, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the bystanders. Tanner turned, his expression shifting from authority to shock. "Chief Reed," he stammered, the realization of his mistake dawning on him. Marcus's eyes flashed as he stepped forward. "What in the world are you doing to my daughter?" Tanner opened his mouth, but no words came out. The crowd fell silent, sensing the shift in power. Maya looked up at her father, relief and fear mingling in her eyes. Marcus's voice was steady but laced with anger. "I want those cuffs off now." Tanner fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking. "Chief, I thought." "You thought wrong." Marcus's tone was sharp, the authority in his voice undeniable. As the cuffs came off, he pulled Maya into a protective embrace. "You're okay now, sweetheart," he whispered, but his eyes stayed locked on Tanner, promising that this wasn't over. As they stood there, the crowd's phones still recording, the tension in the air was palpable. The incident was far from resolved, and as Marcus led Maya back to the car, he knew that the next steps would be critical, not just for his daughter, but for the entire department. The stage was set for a confrontation that would go beyond one officer's mistake, rippling out to challenge the system Marcus had sworn to uphold. It didn't take long. By the next morning, the video was everywhere. Social media feeds, news channels, even local radio. The grainy footage, filmed by a bystander, captured Maya being handcuffed and led to the patrol car, her face a mask of fear and confusion. As it played, the comments flooded in, many condemning the police department for their clear case of racial profiling. At the Reed household, Marcus sat at the kitchen table, his eyes glued to his phone screen. Maya, seated across from him, felt the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. "I didn't want this to go public," she whispered, wrapping her arms around herself. "I know, Maya," Marcus replied, his voice tight. "But now that it has, there's no going back." Maya glanced at him, her eyes searching for reassurance. "What happens now?" Marcus sighed, rubbing his temples. "There's going to be pressure, on me, on the department, and on you. We'll have to address this head-on." Later that morning, Marcus called Cole into his office. The tension between them was palpable as Cole walked in, his face guarded but wary. "Sit down," Marcus said, his voice cold. Cole obeyed, his posture stiff. "What were you thinking?" Marcus's tone was sharp, and he didn't bother hiding his frustration. "Did you even look at her documents? Did you bother to listen?" Cole's eyes flickered with defensiveness. "Chief, I was following protocol." She was acting suspicious. "She was driving, Tanner," Marcus snapped, leaning forward. "In her own neighborhood. You detained her based on an assumption." Cole's jaw tightened. "I thought." "That's the problem, Cole," Marcus interrupted, his voice rising. "You thought, but you didn't verify. And now, it's blown up in our faces." Cole's hands clenched into fists. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was just doing my job." Marcus's eyes burned with anger. "Your job is to protect, not profile." You've put this department and my family in the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. He paused, taking a deep breath to calm himself. There will be an official investigation. You'll be on administrative leave until we get to the bottom of this. Cole's face went pale. Chief, that's final. Marcus's tone left no room for argument. And let's be clear, this isn't just about you. It's about how we operate as a department. We need to be better. Outside the Reed home, reporters had gathered, cameras poised and microphones extended as they clamored for a statement. Maya watched from the living room window, anxiety churning in her stomach. Marcus stood beside her, a hand on her shoulder. You don't have to talk to them, Maya. She turned to him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. But if I don't say something, they'll make up their own stories. He nodded. That's true. But you need to be sure you're ready for this. Once you speak, they'll twist your words, put you under a microscope. Maya took a deep breath, steadying herself. I'm ready. With her father by her side, she stepped out onto the porch. The crowd went silent as she lifted the microphone. My name is Maya Reed, she began, her voice trembling slightly. Yesterday, I was pulled over and detained for driving my father's car. She paused, feeling the eyes of the crowd on her. I was handcuffed and treated like a criminal before I even had a chance to explain. I want everyone to know, I am not a criminal. I am a daughter, a student, and someone who believes in justice. The reporters shouted questions, their voices overlapping. Maya, do you believe this was a case of racial profiling? One of them asked. Maya hesitated, her eyes flicking to her father's. I believe. I was judged before I had a chance to be heard. Her words hung in the air, and she could feel the tension rippling through the crowd. This is bigger than me. This is about changing the system so that no one has to go through what I did. As the questions continued, Marcus stepped in. That's enough for today. He guided Maya back inside, closing the door behind them. You did well. Maya nodded, but her heart felt heavy. She knew this was just the beginning. The community center buzzed with activity as residents gathered for the emergency meeting. Marcus and Maya sat near the front, the tension in the room palpable as community members, activists, and other officers took their seats. A speaker stepped up to the microphone, his voice echoing through the room. We're here because of the injustice Maya Reed faced, something that has happened too often in our community. The crowd murmured in agreement. Marcus felt the eyes on him, and Maya squeezed his hand under the table. You're doing the right thing, Dad, she whispered. As the meeting progressed, Marcus stood to address the crowd. I understand the anger and frustration many of you feel. What happened to my daughter was wrong, and I am committed to making sure we find out why it happened and prevent it from happening again. Maya was invited to speak next. She walked to the microphone, her heart pounding. I know many of you are angry, she began, and so am I. But this is about more than just one officer or one incident. It's about a system that needs change. Her words stirred the crowd. In the back, Cole stood, feeling the weight of every word. The anger in the room was tangible, and he couldn't shake the growing realization of how his actions had triggered this wave of emotion. The day after the community meeting, Marcus sat in his office, reviewing complaints pouring in from the public. His phone buzzed. The mayor was on the line. Marcus, we need to get ahead of this. The mayor's voice was urgent. The city is demanding answers. We can't afford to have this department's reputation crumble. Marcus rubbed his forehead. I understand, but it's not just about damage control. We need real solutions. The mayor sighed. Start with the officer. Make an example of him. Marcus's jaw clenched. I won't scapegoat Cole. The issue is deeper than one man's mistake. If you don't act, I will. The mayor threatened before hanging up. Frustrated, Marcus stood and walked to the window, staring out at the city. The pressure was mounting from every direction. His duty as a chief, his role as a father, and the need for justice. As Marcus prepared to launch an official investigation, he knew the stakes were higher than ever. It wasn't just his career or the department's reputation on the line. It was about the trust of an entire community and the legacy he would leave behind. The lines were drawn. Maya's bravery in speaking out had put them all in the spotlight, and now it was up to Marcus to lead the charge. But as the department began to fracture, with some officers standing behind Cole and others calling for his removal, Marcus realized that this was a fight that would challenge everything he believed in. Maya sat at her desk, the screen of her laptop casting a pale glow on her face. It had been a long night, and despite her father's reassurances, she couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was wrong. Determined, she began to search through online forums, police records, and news archives. Every click and every article took her deeper into the system she thought she knew so well. As she sifted through reports, she noticed a pattern. Multiple complaints against Officer Cole Tanner, dating back several years. Excessive force, bias in judgment, and failure to follow proper procedures appeared more than once. Each time, the investigations were dismissed as inconclusive. She leaned back, frowning. Why didn't anyone do anything about this? She muttered. Her thoughts whirled. If her father knew about these complaints, why was Cole still on the force? Determined to find answers, she bookmarked the reports and jotted down notes. She needed to understand how deep this went and why her father hadn't acted sooner. Cole sat in the dim light of his apartment, the walls closing in on him. His suspension had left him with too much time to think, and for the first time in years, he wasn't sure of himself. The anger that had fueled him for so long felt hollow now. He opened an old photo album, finding a picture of his father in uniform, a proud officer who'd fallen from grace. I was just following in your footsteps, he whispered, running a hand over the image. But as he sat there, he realized it wasn't just his father's shadow he was chasing. It was his bitterness. With a sigh, he closed the album and picked up the reports that had been dropped off by his supervisor earlier. They were filled with complaints against him, complaints he had always brushed off. But now, each one felt like a punch to the gut. The image of Maya's face flashed in his mind. Her fear, her confusion. He clenched his fist. How did I become this person? He asked himself. For the first time, Cole began to question everything. His motivations, his biases, and the legacy of his father that he had carried for so long. Maya's investigation led her to the police archives. It took some persuading, but she managed to gain access to the records room. As she flipped through the files, she stumbled upon an old case involving her father, Marcus Reed, and a name she knew well, Tanner. Her eyes widened as she read the details. Years ago, her father had been responsible for dismissing Cole's father from the force. The report detailed corruption charges and misconduct, which led to the elder Tanner's downfall. Her father had been the lead investigator. Maya's mind raced. This is it, she whispered. This is why Cole acted the way he did. It's personal. The pieces started falling into place. Cole's resentment, his actions, everything made sense now. But as the truth settled in, so did the weight of it. Her father had been hiding this part of his past. And now, she had a decision to make. Confront him or use the information to push for the changes she believed in. Maya paced the living room, her heart pounding. When Marcus finally walked in, she turned to face him, clutching the file she had found. We need to talk, she said, her voice tense. Marcus paused, reading the intensity in her eyes. What's going on, Maya? She held up the file. Why didn't you tell me about Cole's father? You led the investigation that got him fired. This isn't just about what happened to me. It's about you and him. Marcus's face tightened, and he let out a sigh. I knew this would come up eventually, he admitted, taking a seat. Yes, I led the investigation against Cole's father. But that was years ago. It had nothing to do with what happened to you. Nothing? Maya scoffed. Dad, it's everything. Cole's carrying a grudge because of what you did. And now I'm caught in the middle. Marcus rubbed his temples. I did what I had to do back then. His father was involved in things that went against everything we stand for. I couldn't let it slide. But you never told me, Maya pressed. And now, it's affecting everything. How am I supposed to believe in the system when the people I trust most have secrets like this? Marcus's eyes softened, but there was a sadness in them. I wanted to protect you, Maya. I didn't want you caught up in the mess of my past. Well, I am now, she replied, crossing her arms. So what are we going to do about it? Later that night, Maya sat on her bed, the file spread out before her. Her father's words echoed in her mind, but so did the faces of the people she'd seen at the community meeting. They deserved to know the truth, and so did she. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she'd been avoiding. "Hi, this is Maya Reed. I have a story I think you'll want to hear." The journalist on the other end perked up, her voice excited. "What's it about?" Maya took a deep breath. "It's about my father, the police department, and how a mistake from years ago is impacting everything today." As she spoke, she felt the weight of her decision settle in. Going public would mean risking her relationship with her father and exposing the truth she'd just uncovered. But it was also a chance to push for real change. Maya's resolve hardened. If she was going to fight for justice, she had to be willing to confront the past, no matter the cost. As she hung up, she knew the fallout would be immense, but she was ready to face whatever came next. Maya's story hit the news like a firestorm. Protests erupted outside the police station and throughout the city, demanding accountability and an overhaul of the police system. Crowds gathered, holding signs that read, "Justice for Maya and end racial profiling now." The chants echoed through the streets, growing louder each day. At home, Maya watched the protests unfold on TV. She had wanted change, but seeing the anger and chaos she had ignited made her uneasy. Marcus, standing beside her, could sense her discomfort. "I didn't expect it to get this big," Maya admitted, hugging her arms tightly around herself. Marcus sighed, rubbing his brow. When people feel unheard for too long, it only takes one spark to ignite everything. "Do you think this will help?" she asked, glancing up at him. He paused, considering his words carefully. "It can, but it also depends on how we respond. The pressure is on me now, and it's not going to be easy." The mayor called an emergency meeting at City Hall, and Marcus found himself seated at a long conference table, surrounded by city officials and council members. The tension was palpable. The mayor, an older man with a stern expression, wasted no time. "Marcus, the city is demanding action. We need to restore public trust, and right now, that means firing Officer Tanner." Marcus stiffened. Firing him won't fix the system. The problem is deeper than one officer. The mayor's eyes narrowed. "It's not just about Tanner. It's about you, Marcus. The public wants to know that we're serious about change. They want to know that the police chief is willing to take decisive action. If I fire him without due process, it sets a precedent." "It's a quick fix, not a solution," Marcus countered. "We need to implement real reforms, not just scapegoat one man." The mayor leaned forward. "And what if the community demands your resignation too? Are you prepared for that?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "If that's what it takes, then I'll step down. But I won't be forced into making a decision that doesn't address the real issue." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. The mayor exchanged glances with the council members before nodding. "Very well, but you've got one shot, Marcus. Show the city you're serious about change." Later that day, Marcus sat in his office, the shadows of the setting sun casting long lines across his desk. He looked up as a knock sounded at the door. "Come in." Cole entered, his expression grim. He closed the door behind him, standing awkwardly in the middle of the room. "Chief, I know I'm the reason all of this is happening, and I know what people are saying." Marcus watched him silently, waiting for him to continue. I want to resign," Cole said, his voice heavy with resignation. "I've caused enough damage. Maybe it's time I step aside." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Do you think resigning will solve anything?" Cole blinked, clearly caught off guard. I don't know. I just thought." "Running away won't make up for what you did," Marcus interrupted, his voice firm. "But if you truly want to make amends, you need to face the consequences and work to change." Cole's shoulders slumped. "I've been carrying a lot of anger for years, anger I didn't even realize I had. I know now that I let it get in the way of my duty." He paused, the emotion thick in his voice. "I want to make things right, but I don't know if I can." Marcus's gaze softened slightly. "It's not about knowing if you can. It's about trying. And if you're serious about this, then we'll work together to change things." Cole nodded, gratitude flickering in his eyes. "Thank you, Chief. I won't let you down." A week later, the tension in the city reached a boiling point. Crowds gathered outside the police station, their anger palpable. Marcus and his officers were stationed outside, trying to keep the peace as protesters chanted and waved their signs. Among them, Maya stood at the front, her presence both a source of strength and worry for her father. Suddenly, shouts erupted from the edge of the crowd. A group of agitators pushed their way forward, trying to incite violence. Fists flew, and the peaceful protest turned chaotic in seconds. Maya was caught in the surge of people, struggling to keep her balance. She felt herself being pushed and pulled, the crowd closing in around her. "Dad!" she cried, but her voice was lost in the noise. From across the street, Cole spotted her. Without hesitation, he sprinted into the fray, pushing past protesters to reach her. "Maya, hold on," he shouted. He grabbed her arm, pulling her out of the crush of bodies just as a bottle flew through the air, shattering against the pavement where she had stood. Shielding her, Cole led her to safety behind a police barricade. "Are you okay?" he asked, his eyes scanning her for injuries. Maya, catching her breath, looked up at him in shock. "Why did you?" "Because it was the right thing to do," Cole replied simply, his expression sincere. For the first time, Maya saw a flicker of something different in his eyes, something that hinted at change. The chaos of the protest slowly subsided, but the tension remained high. Marcus stood on the steps of the police station, watching as the crowd dispersed. He knew what needed to be done. He turned to face the reporters who had gathered, their cameras focused on him. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward to the podium. "Thank you all for being here today. I know tensions are high, and there is much anger in our city. And for good reason." He paused, the weight of his next words pressing down on him. "As chief of police, I take full responsibility for the actions of my department. What happened to my daughter was a failure on our part, a failure to uphold the values we stand for." The crowd murmured, and Marcus continued. "I want to announce that we will be launching a full-scale reform initiative within the department. This will include mandatory bias training, community engagement programs, and the implementation of new policies to ensure accountability and transparency." A reporter shouted, "Is this enough to fix the damage done?" Marcus met the reporter's eyes. "This is only the beginning. Real change doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, effort, and commitment from every single one of us, officers and community members alike." As he concluded his speech, Marcus saw Maya standing at the edge of the crowd, her expression a mix of pride and hope. And next to her stood Cole, who had proven himself willing to do the right thing, even when it was difficult. Marcus's decision to stay and fight for reform was just the first step, but as he watched his daughter and his officer, he felt a renewed sense of determination. The road ahead would be long, but for the first time, he believed they could build something better, together. The reform program kicked off with a meeting in the community center, packed with activists, officers, and residents. The room buzzed with tension and anticipation as Chief Marcus Reed stood at the front, ready to address everyone. "We're here today to take the first step in building trust between the police force and our community," Marcus began, his voice steady but serious. "This reform program will require effort from all of us, officers and citizens alike." Maya stood at the side, watching her father command the room. Beside her, Cole looked uneasy but resolute. When Marcus called for volunteers to join the reform committee, Cole was one of the first to raise his hand. He glanced around, feeling the eyes of the crowd on him, some judgmental, some curious. "I'm ready to do the work," Cole said, his voice firm. "I know I've made mistakes, and I want to help fix this." Maya felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things could change. As other officers and community members signed up, she saw the beginnings of a new path forming, one where people could come together to create something better. A few days later, Maya joined the reform committee as a youth representative. Sitting across the table from officers, activists, and local leaders, she felt a sense of responsibility she hadn't before. The stakes were higher now. It wasn't just about her, but about everyone who had been affected. During the meeting, Maya proposed a community outreach program. "We need to build trust again," she explained. "It's not enough to say we're changing. We need to show it." One officer scoffed. "You think a few friendly chats are going to fix this?" Cole, seated next to her, leaned forward. She's right. We've lost trust, and we need to earn it back, one step at a time. Maya shot him a surprised look. The two of them had been distant since the incident, but this was the first time she sensed genuine support from him. "Thank you, Cole," she said, offering a small nod. Cole gave her a tight smile. "We're all in this together now." The meeting continued, and as Maya spoke with more confidence, she felt a connection forming, a tentative bridge between her, Cole, and the others. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Late one night, after a long committee meeting, Maya and Marcus found themselves alone at the community center. The room was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the air conditioning. Marcus leaned against a table, looking weary. "You're doing great work, Maya. You're making a real difference." She hesitated, then spoke. "Dad, why didn't you tell me about your history with Cole's father?" Marcus's shoulders sagged, and he let out a deep sigh. "I thought I was protecting you. I didn't want you to see the uglier side of what I do." "But it matters," Maya insisted. "That history affects everything. Cole's actions, our relationship with the community, and even how people look at me now." He nodded slowly. "I know, and I regret not being open with you. I've made mistakes I thought I could keep from you. But I see now that wasn't fair." Maya's expression softened. "I just want you to know that I believe in what we're doing. But I need to trust that you're being honest with me." Marcus reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I promise, Maya. From now on, no more secrets. We'll do this together." She smiled, and for the first time in weeks, a sense of peace settled between them. They had a long road ahead, but they were starting to rebuild the trust they both needed. The reforms weren't welcomed by everyone. In the weeks that followed, murmurs of discontent spread through the station. Some officers openly resisted, claiming the changes were unnecessary and that the public was being unfair to them. One afternoon, Cole overheard a group of officers in the break room. "This is all a joke," one muttered. "Why should we bend over backward because of one incident?" Cole felt the familiar anger rise, but this time, he pushed it down. "It wasn't just one incident," he said, stepping forward. "This is about fixing what's been broken for a long time." The officers turned to him, their faces hardening. "And you think you're the hero now, Tanner? You think you can just switch sides and everything will be fine?" Cole met their stares, feeling the weight of his decision. "No, I don't. But I'm trying to be better, and I think we all need to." The tension in the room was thick, and for a moment, Cole wondered if he had made the right choice. The officers exchanged glances before one of them shrugged. "We'll see, Tanner. We'll see." As they left, Cole felt the pressure building. There were those who would fight the change, but he was determined to stand his ground. The next town hall meeting was a pivotal moment. The room was filled with residents, officers, and media, all eager to hear about the progress of the reforms. Marcus began by outlining the new programs and initiatives, but the atmosphere was tense. When Maya was called to speak, she stood confidently, sharing her experience and vision for the future. "We can't change what happened, but we can change what happens next. We can build a system where everyone feels safe." The crowd responded with cautious applause, and Maya stepped back, motioning for Cole to take the microphone. He hesitated, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. Taking a deep breath, he began. "I'm Officer Cole Tanner, and I know many of you don't trust me. I've made mistakes, big ones, and I'm not proud of them." His voice wavered, but he continued. "I was wrong, and I want to make amends. I'm committed to the reforms and to earning back the trust I've lost." The room was silent, and for a moment, Cole felt his heart sink. But then, slowly, a few people began to clap. Others joined in, until half the room was applauding. Some faces still showed doubt, but there was also a glimmer of hope. Maya watched from the side, her eyes meeting Cole's. She gave him a nod of encouragement, and for the first time, he felt a sense of possibility. The path to redemption was long, but together, they were taking the first steps. The atmosphere in the police station was tense. A faction of officers, resistant to the ongoing reforms, staged a walkout, leaving Marcus with a skeleton crew. The department, already under strain from public pressure and dwindling resources, was on the brink of collapse. Marcus stood in the center of the nearly empty briefing room, a grim look on his face. Cole and Maya were there, along with a handful of remaining officers, all looking uncertain. "We don't have the numbers we need," Marcus began, his voice grave. "But that doesn't mean we back down. We've got protests scheduled all week, and we need to be out there, ensuring things remain peaceful." Maya stepped forward, her eyes fierce with determination. "We need to rally the community. We can't let a few agitators ruin everything we've worked for." Cole nodded. "She's right. We've come too far to let this fall apart now." Marcus's gaze softened as he looked at his daughter and Cole. "Then we'll face this head-on, together. We keep the peace and show the community we're here to protect and serve, no matter what." Inspired by the situation at the station, Maya organized a peaceful rally to show solidarity for the reform efforts. She stood at the center of the town square, surrounded by supporters. The crowd was a mix of community members, activists, and a few sympathetic officers. Maya took the microphone, her voice amplified through the speakers. "We stand here today, not just for justice, but for unity. We've seen what division can do. It tears apart communities, it destroys trust. But today, we choose to come together." The crowd erupted in applause. She scanned their faces, seeing the hope and determination mirrored in their eyes. "Change isn't easy," she continued, "and we've faced obstacles. But this is our chance to prove that we are stronger together, that we can build a community where every voice is heard and every life is valued." From the side of the stage, Marcus watched, his heart swelling with pride. This was the leader his daughter was becoming, a voice for justice and unity. As the rally continued, a small group of agitators moved through the crowd, shouting and trying to incite violence. The tension escalated quickly, and Marcus signaled to the officers to be ready. Cole saw the group gathering near the front and moved to intercept them. "Hey, we're here for a peaceful rally," he said, his tone calm but firm. "Let's keep it that way." One of the agitators scoffed. "Why should we listen to you, cop? You're the reason we're out here." Cole's eyes met the young man's. "I know I've made mistakes, and I'm working to make things right. But today isn't about me, it's about all of us." The man hesitated, but the tension in the air was thick. Another agitator pushed forward, and it seemed like a fight would break out. But before it could escalate, Cole raised his hands. "No violence," he insisted. "This isn't the way." Maya, seeing the commotion, stepped down from the stage and joined Cole. "We're all here for the same reason," she said, her voice strong. "Let's not let anger overshadow our message." Slowly, the crowd began to calm, and the agitators backed off. Maya smiled at Cole, and for the first time, he felt the beginnings of trust forming between them. With the rally back under control, Marcus stepped forward to address the crowd. The tension was palpable as he took the microphone, but he stood tall, determined to be honest. "Many of you know me as Chief Marcus Reed," he began, his voice steady. "And many of you know what happened with my daughter and Officer Tanner. I want to acknowledge that we made mistakes. I made mistakes." The crowd was silent, waiting for his next words. "The truth is, the system we have isn't perfect, and it's hurt people. But we're here today because we believe it can change. I promise you, as your chief, that I will continue to push for reforms, for transparency, and for justice." He paused, scanning the crowd. "This isn't just about my daughter. It's about everyone who has been mistreated or unfairly judged. It's about creating a force that serves and protects all of you." The crowd erupted in applause, and Marcus felt a sense of hope. He had been honest, and the people were responding. He glanced at Maya, who gave him a nod of encouragement. As the rally wound down, Marcus, Maya, and Cole stood together, looking out over the crowd. The community was coming together, and for the first time in weeks, Marcus felt like they were on the right path. "Feels like things are finally starting to change," Maya said, a hint of optimism in her voice. Cole nodded. "It's not going to be easy, but I think we can do it. If we stick together." Marcus placed a hand on both their shoulders. "We've got a long road ahead, but we've taken the first step. And that's what matters." As they watched the crowd begin to disperse, the three of them stood side by side, united in their resolve to build a better, fairer community. The journey wasn't over, but they knew they had the strength and support to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The promise of a new beginning shone bright, and they were ready to walk that path together.